Hi, my name is Brannon, and I guess I should start with this. One day after my wedding, I learned the kind of truth that doesn't just break a marriage, it breaks a man. The restaurant manager called and said, "Come alone. Don't tell your wife." And when he showed me the footage, I realized my family hadn't just failed me. They'd been watching me walk into a trap they built piece by piece. A brother who envied me, a wife who never really chose me, relatives who laughed behind my back, all while I thought I finally had a future. And the hardest part? The betrayal didn't start on my wedding night. It started long before, when they decided I was the one who'd never fight back. If you've ever wondered how far people will go when they think you're too quiet to stop them, stay with me. Because what I discovered next still shakes me every time I say it out loud. I woke up to the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of birds outside, my head still hazy from last night. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For a man who just got married, you'd think I'd feel more something. Joy, maybe. Excitement. Relief. But I felt none of that. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence press against my chest. Marla wasn't there. I could hear her voice faintly, probably in the kitchen, talking on the phone. Her voice was calm, even cheerful, but distant. I stood, walked into the kitchen barefoot. The cold tiles jolted my senses. Marla stood by the counter, coffee in one hand, phone pressed to her ear. She glanced at me, offered a brief smile, then turned her gaze back to the window. "Yeah, I know. I'll call you later," she said softly into the phone. Then she hung up. She didn't say who it was. I didn't ask. I opened a drawer out of habit and pulled out a napkin. My fingers began folding it absent-mindedly. Tight creases, edges aligned. It was something I'd done for years. Folding napkins used to calm me when I worked at my uncle's diner. Funny how some habits never leave. She took a sip of coffee and said, "I might go see Mom later." I nodded. Okay. There was nothing wrong with her words, but the way she said them, casual, like we were two old roommates, sat wrong in my chest. I stared out the window, trying not to overthink. The wedding had been fine. The reception? Short. My family left early. No surprise there. I was the youngest, the invisible one, the one who didn't need applause, who wasn't expected to shine. My older brother gave a 2-minute toast, half read off his phone. My parents hugged me like I just graduated high school. That was it. But I didn't get married for a party. I married Marla because I thought she was steady, real. The kitchen clock clicked toward noon. I was about to rinse out my mug when my phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Hello? Is this Brannon Hale?" A male voice asked, tight and professional. "Yeah." "This is Ramon, the manager at Briarwood Restaurant, where your reception was yesterday." I stood up straighter. "Yes, everything okay?" There was a pause. Then, "We reviewed the camera footage this morning. I think you need to come in." I frowned. "What for?" "Please come alone, and don't tell your wife." The line went silent. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Is this about Marla?" Another pause. "Just come. We'll talk here. It's best you see it yourself." I hung up and turned toward Marla. She was scrolling her phone, completely detached from me. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" "Just a quick errand," I said. "Might take an hour." She nodded, not even curious. "All right." I grabbed my keys. As I walked out, something in my gut twisted. The sun was high, but the warmth didn't reach me. The drive was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. Houston traffic always gave me something to complain about, but today I barely noticed the red lights or honking horns. My thoughts ran in loops. Why the secrecy? What could be on that footage? By the time I pulled into the empty parking lot of Briarwood, the shadows had begun to stretch long and thin. The place looked completely different from the night before. No laughter, no music, just a stillness that felt ominous. Inside, a hostess gave me a forced smile and pointed toward the hallway. "He's waiting for you." She didn't meet my eyes. I walked past the dining room into a back office where the manager stood by a desk cluttered with receipts and takeout menus. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. When he saw me, he nodded. "Thanks for coming." He closed the door and locked it. My throat tightened. "So, what's this about?" He walked to a monitor and clicked through some security files. "I debated whether to call you," he said, "but when I saw it, I thought you'd want to know." I stayed silent. He double-clicked a file. The screen lit up with a feed from the hallway outside the restrooms. I remembered that hallway. It led toward the staff-only exit and some private booths. The timestamp was around 8:12 p.m. I watched as Marla appeared on the screen, walking briskly down the hall. A moment later, another figure followed her. My jaw tensed. It was Denny, my brother. They weren't holding hands. They didn't kiss. But the space between them, the way she turned slightly when he spoke, the way he touched her elbow lightly. The body language screamed something I didn't want to admit. The manager paused the video. "There's more," he said carefully, "but you should prepare yourself." I said nothing. My heart pounded in my ears. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Denny. He barely spoke to her during the reception. Or maybe I didn't notice. I'd been too busy thanking guests, shaking hands, pretending everything was perfect. I swallowed hard. I appreciate you showing me," I said quietly, my voice dry. He looked at me with sympathy. "You sure you're okay?" "No," I admitted. He reached toward the computer again. "You can see the rest now, or later, but I think you'll need to." I stepped back from the desk. "Not now." The hallway outside felt longer than before, like the floor itself was tilting. I walked past the staff, out the doors, into the fading sun. The air felt heavier. I climbed into my truck, shut the door, and just sat there. For a long time, I didn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Part of me wanted to drive straight home and pretend this never happened. Another part whispered, "You always give people the benefit of the doubt. But what if that's why they think you'll never fight back?" I thought of all the times I'd been the one to smooth things over. Let things slide. Pretend everything was fine so no one else would feel uncomfortable. But this wasn't something I could smooth over. I took a breath. I need to know what else they saw. I didn't even realize I'd turned the truck around until I was already halfway back to the restaurant. The road looked different now. Darker, longer, like it knew something I didn't. The late afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the pavement, stretching like truths I hadn't wanted to see. The restaurant hadn't changed. Same faded stucco, same flower pots by the entrance. But stepping back inside, it felt colder. Not in temperature, just in weight, like the walls were holding their breath. Ramon was waiting. He didn't smile this time, just nodded and motioned for me to follow. We walked the same hallway again, but slower, more deliberate. When he opened the door to the private office, I paused for a second before stepping in. He closed the door behind us and turned the lock with a click that felt too loud in the silence. I stood in the center of the room, barely breathing. Let's see the rest. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. It should have. But somehow, it came out firm. My insides were screaming, but my face stayed still. Ramon didn't say anything. He just walked to the monitor, pulled up the next video file, and hit play. The timestamp showed it was 15 minutes after the first clip. Same hallway, same angle. Marla again. But this time, she wasn't with Denny. It was Rhett, my oldest brother. The one who always had something slick to say. The one who gave me a handshake instead of a hug at my wedding. The one who avoided eye contact last night like it burned. They walked slowly, side by side. No audio, but the gestures were clear. She laughed. Not a big laugh, just one of those small, familiar ones. Her hand brushed his arm. He leaned in closer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a white envelope, handed it to her like it was nothing. She took it and slipped it into her purse. No hesitation, no question. Just done. My arms went numb. Ramon paused the video and turned to me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. I just stared at the screen. I wasn't even sure I was blinking. I whispered, more to myself than to him. He didn't even talk to me at the reception. Ramon hesitated. There's something else. I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I'd want to know. I nodded, still looking at the monitor. Go ahead. One of my servers, Jen, was clearing glasses near the back bar during cleanup. She overheard Marla talking to someone. She said, he looked down before continuing. She said, this marriage will lock everything in place. He's easy. I didn't move. My chest felt tight, like my ribs had forgotten how to expand. She said it like it was just business, he added. I swallowed hard, but the lump in my throat didn't go anywhere. There it was. Not just betrayal, not just secrecy, but a plan, a setup. And I walked right into it. I pressed my palms into the edge of the desk, grounding myself. So, it was never real? Ramon didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was thick enough. I stood up straighter, trying to breathe evenly. The muscles in my jaw tightened, holding something down I wasn't ready to let out. She's not just cheating, I said slowly. They planned it. He nodded slightly. I'm sorry, Brannon. I thought you should know before anyone else tried to spin it. There was a pause. Then he added more reluctantly, there's something else. I didn't show this before because I thought it was just stupid chatter, but now I'm not so sure. He clicked through a few files and played an audio clip from the kitchen hallway, near where the service staff took breaks. Voices, laughter. A few of my cousins, maybe half drunk, maybe not. One said, he's still the kid we all babysat. Another chimed in, always been the quiet one, always will be. Followed by a round of laughter. He just does what he's told. My stomach clenched. Those voices were too familiar. Rhett, Kyle, maybe Travis. I'd heard that tone before. When I was 10 and left out of baseball games. When I was 16 and not invited to the lake trip. When I was 25 and they forgot my birthday dinner. I thought marriage would change something. Make me a man in their eyes, an equal. But to them, I was still just the kid. The one they joked about behind closed doors. Thanks, I said softly, my voice flat. Ramon gave a sad smile. You don't deserve this. I shook my head slowly. Doesn't matter what I deserve. It's already done. He didn't try to stop me when I turned to leave. I walked out the office, the hallway stretching long again. Every step felt like moving through water. When I reached the front of the restaurant, the sky had deepened into a dull orange. Evening was settling in. The parking lot was mostly empty now, just my truck, and a breeze moving through the trees. I paused near the railing outside, resting my hands on the cool metal. I looked out, not at anything in particular, just needing to hold on to something. The pain was there, still sharp, but underneath it, something else, a flicker. I didn't know what it was yet. But it wasn't weakness. I wouldn't explode. I wouldn't scream. That's not who I was. But I also wouldn't keep being the one everyone could step over like a welcome mat. Not anymore. I whispered into the thick air, I need to know how deep this goes. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had dipped just low enough to cast long shadows over the front porch. The house was bathed in soft orange light, the kind that should have felt warm, but as I stepped out of the truck and walked up the path, everything looked wrong. Not messy, not out of place in any obvious way, just wrong. The front door creaked the way it always did, but when I stepped inside, the air felt heavier, like I'd walked into a set instead of my home. Yesterday, it was quiet in that newlywed kind of way, soft, hopeful, full of tiny signs of fresh beginnings. Today, it felt staged, arranged, as if someone had carefully placed everything just so, hoping I wouldn't notice the gaps. Her shoes were by the door, but they weren't lined up the way she usually left them. One was turned slightly inward, the other practically in the hallway. That wasn't like her. Her purse was on the dining table. I stood in front of it longer than I probably should have. The envelope from Rhett, gone. I didn't touch anything, just stared, as if the answer might rise up and meet me. I walked slowly through the living room, not really sure what I was looking for, only that I'd know if something wasn't right. Her wedding dress was draped over the back of the recliner, half hanging, half wrinkled. I remembered last night, watching her carefully fold it and lay it over the cedar chest. So why was it here now? Sloppy, like it had been tossed. In the kitchen, a wine glass sat in the sink. I hadn't had wine, and she never drank red unless someone else poured it first. A sour scent lingered in the air. Sharp. Cologne I didn't wear. Not mine. Too strong to be from the wedding crowd. I stood still, letting it settle around me. Not trying to rush it, just letting the details surface. I saw her last night, phone in hand, tapping away while I was thanking guests. She hadn't looked up when my aunt gave us a gift. I'd told myself she was tired, that it had been a long day. But now it played out like a reel. Rhett was gone for a stretch. She left 5 minutes later, came back laughing. Rhett came back chewing gum and pretending nothing was off. It wasn't one moment. It was 100 small ones, all pointing in the same direction. I moved through the hallway, lights off. Didn't need them. I knew this house. But tonight, it didn't feel like mine. Our bedroom was neat, like always. But when I sat down at the edge of the bed, the weight of it all pressed into my chest. There was this moment, just a flash, during the reception. I reached for her hand under the table, trying to make her laugh. She jerked it back, smiled too quickly, said something about her hair and started adjusting a pin. Back then, I thought nothing of it. She was overwhelmed. She'd had champagne. But now I remember Rhett standing just behind us, near the gift table, staring at her like they had a private joke. And suddenly, that gesture wasn't about hair at all. She wasn't pulling away from me. She was pulling away because he was watching. I sat there, palms resting on my knees, staring at the floor. That realization stung more than any video, because it was mine. I'd seen it. and I'd explained it away. The betrayal didn't start today. I just finally caught up. I stood and took a breath. Deep, controlled. No confrontation yet. Not tonight. She'd twist it. Cry. Say I was paranoid. She was good at that, making truth look like confusion. And Rhett? He'd laugh. Turn it into a joke. You're reading into it, little brother. Always too sensitive. I wasn't walking into that trap again. I whispered to myself, not this time. I won't go in blind. I left the bedroom and headed toward the hallway closet. During the wedding prep, I'd thrown some boxes and decorations into the guest room to clear space. I figured now was a good time to move them out. I opened the guest room door and flicked the light on. That's when I saw it. On the bed, plain as day, was a napkin. Not just any napkin, the same style as the ones from the restaurant. It was folded, but not the way I folded napkins. Mine were tight, precise. Muscle memory after years of doing it for comfort. This one was sloppy. Edges uneven, corners puffed. It looked rushed. I stepped closer, not touching it, just looking. Nobody had any reason to be in this room yesterday. Not during the reception, not after. I looked around. Nothing else seemed moved. But that napkin, it didn't belong. And it told me one thing loud and clear. Someone had been in my house. Maybe during the wedding. Maybe after. But definitely without telling me. I stood in the doorway, holding the napkin now, letting the shape of it dig into my palm. Someone folded this. Someone thought they were clever. Someone had no idea I'd notice. But I did. And that meant the game wasn't over. It had just begun. I said aloud, not shouting, just stating it like a fact. Someone was in my house last night. The light outside hadn't changed much. Morning was barely crawling in through the blinds, casting silver-gray slats across the kitchen wall. I sat at the table, elbows resting beside the napkin I'd brought from the guest room. It was still folded, if you could call it that, sloppy, creased in the wrong places, nothing like how I usually did it. I hadn't slept. I'd tried lying down for an hour, but the second I closed my eyes, my mind rewound itself. Back to the restaurant, to the footage, to Rhett and Marla, to the envelope that had vanished. I kept asking the same things, over and over, not in panic. More like someone rechecking an engine that wouldn't start. Why had the manager insisted I come alone? Why did Rhett look so relaxed when he leaned into Marla's space, like he'd done it 100 times? Why had Marla been so distant the entire night and even colder after? There was a difference between being blind and choosing not to see. I was finally realizing I'd done the latter. For too long, but I couldn't act yet, not without something more solid. Something that couldn't be twisted or denied. I needed a neutral voice. Someone who'd seen the whole picture without being part of it. So, I grabbed my keys again, slipped the napkin into my back pocket, and headed out before the sun had properly risen. The streets were still wet from the early dew, the city not quite awake. I drove without the radio, no distractions, just the sound of my own breath and tires rolling over asphalt. The place I went was quiet, tucked between an old bait shop and a barber's. Lyle's Diner wasn't the kind of spot you'd find on Yelp. It didn't need to be. Everyone who mattered already knew it. Lyle Harker had run it for as long as I could remember. He wasn't blood, but he'd been close enough to family growing up that we all called him Uncle Lyle when we were kids. Even Rhett, though less respectfully. He was the kind of man who remembered the way your father took his coffee, or the exact day your sister got her first car. He noticed things most folks missed. When I pushed open the door, The little bell above it jingled, and Lyle looked up from behind the counter, halfway through refilling someone's mug. He took one glance at me and said, "You look like hell warmed over. Sit down, son." I slid into the booth by the window. He brought over coffee before I could ask. "You want eggs or just the truth?" he said. I pulled the napkin from my pocket and set it on the table between us. "You tell me." He looked at it without touching it, just stared for a second like it was a puzzle piece from a box he'd seen before. "You sure this came from your place?" he asked. "I found it in the guest room," I said. "No one was supposed to be in there." He leaned back slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You're not gonna like what I say next." "I already don't." He sighed. I saw Rhett leave the reception early. He wasn't alone. The words didn't knock the wind out of me, not like they might have yesterday. I'd already been bracing for something, but still, hearing it out loud from someone who had no reason to lie, it tightened my chest. "Who?" I asked, but I already knew. Lyle looked toward the window. "I ain't gonna say it unless you really want to hear." I nodded. "Say it." "It was Marla," he said quietly. "She said she was stepping out for air." Rhett followed not even a minute later. They didn't come back at the same time, but it wasn't spaced out much either. Didn't feel random. My fingers curled around the edge of the table. He continued, "And he kept looking at you, Brannon, all night, like he was waiting, either for you to notice or for something to blow up." That part stung deeper. It wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. An old pattern playing itself out again. Rhett dangling something just out of reach, daring me to catch on too late. I'd spent my whole life giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just jealous. Maybe he was just reckless. But this was different. The wedding hadn't caused the break. It had revealed it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. I pulled it out. First text. "Where are you? I woke up and you're gone." Second one followed. Rhett called me. "He said you two talked last night. Is something wrong?" I stared at the screen, every word soaked in performance. It wasn't confusion. It was control. Laying the groundwork in case I pushed back. How did Rhett already know I left? I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't even turned on the lights when I left the house. He must have called her before the sun was up. He was getting ahead of me. I didn't reply. Lyle watched my expression. "You don't answer that." "I won't." He leaned forward. "Son, let me tell you something. People like Rhett, they know how to make silence work for them, but only when it's your silence." I looked at him, trying to hold my face steady. "What do I do then?" "You get evidence, not feelings. They'll twist your hurt into paranoia if you let them, but facts? Hard to argue with cold proof." He reached across the table, placed a firm hand over mine. "Don't rush this. Don't confront it yet. Let 'em think you're still in the dark. That's where you'll get the truth." I nodded slowly. The coffee had gone cold, but I wasn't drinking it anyway. I slid the napkin back into my pocket, stood up. He said one last thing before I walked out. "And Brannon, you're not the same kid anymore. Don't let them treat you like it." The door creaked shut behind me as I stepped out into the warm morning air. The sun had finally broken through, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, staring at the concrete beneath my feet. Then I said it out loud, quietly, just for myself. "I'm done being the one who gets blindsided." By the time I pulled out of the diner's gravel lot, The sky had turned from soft gold to a washed-out white. The kind of late morning light that made everything feel overexposed. The heat rising off the hood of my truck was sharp, and inside, the AC took its time catching up. I didn't go home. Instead, I took the long way toward the east side, through parts of Houston I hadn't driven in months, maybe longer. The streets got more familiar the closer I got to Jace's shop. That part of town always smelled like oil and rubber, like the years stuck to the concrete. Jace Morvern wasn't the kind of cousin you called just to catch up. He was quiet, watched more than he spoke, and had a way of seeing things other people missed, including the things you were trying to hide from yourself. The last time I saw him was Christmas. We nodded across the room at each other, said maybe 5 words the entire night, and that was enough. That's the kind of man he is. No filler, no need for polite noise. I pulled into the shop's side lot just as someone's old Ford rattled off the lift. The metal-on-metal shriek cut the air in half, but inside the garage, Jace was steady, wiping grease from his palms with a shop rag, same as always. He looked up and gave the kind of nod that said, "I was wondering when you'd show up. Not why are you here?" I got out and shut the door behind me slower than usual, like even that sound might set something off. "You hungry?" he asked, not bothering with small talk. "Not really." He didn't press it, just motioned for me to follow him around the side of the building where the air was cooler and the noise didn't chase you. We stood there in silence for a beat. Then he asked, flat as ever, "What happened?" I told him. I laid it out from the start. The footage, the napkin in the guest room, the look Rhett gave Marla, the call from Marla asking where I was before I could even think of what to say. I even told him about Lyle. I didn't dress it up, didn't dramatize anything, just said it as plain as I could. At one point, my voice caught, just a flicker of crack when I said, "I don't know if I'm losing it or if I'm finally seeing what's been there the whole time." Jace didn't say a word, didn't nod, didn't blink. He just watched me, his mouth a thin line, arms folded. The kind of stillness that made you feel like you were under a microscope. Then, quietly, he said, "Brannon, I've been keeping something to myself." My chest tensed. He looked past me, then back. "2 months before the wedding," he said, "I saw them, Marla, Rhett, at the restaurant, the one where you did the rehearsal dinner." He paused, like he was giving me space to brace. They weren't touching or anything, but the way they sat, it wasn't right. Too close, too easy. I didn't say anything, couldn't. "I didn't tell you," he went on, "because you looked happy. First time in years. I figured I was just overthinking it. Didn't want to plant seeds if I was wrong." The air around us thickened. My breath got shallow, like my lungs were too tired to argue. He kept going. "But the night of the wedding, that's when I knew I should have said something. Rhett couldn't stay out of her space. He was always near her, watching. She never looked at you the same once he walked in." I leaned against the wall behind me, felt the brick against my spine. Solid, cold. All this time, I'd been thinking the betrayal was new, sudden. But no, it had been there, in plain sight. I just wasn't the one looking. The worst part wasn't that Jace saw it. It was that I hadn't. And maybe worse than that, part of me did, but chose not to name it. I stepped away from the wall and walked toward the far corner of the lot. The sun was high now, baking the pavement. I stood there alone, my hands on my hips, breathing through my nose, trying to stop the spiral before it started. but it came anyway. The weight of it. The pattern of being the last to know. The one who got filled in after it was too late to do anything but survive the fallout. I thought of all the ways I'd tried to be steady, through Dad's breakdown, through Mom's absences, through every mess Rhett left behind. I'd kept my head down, tried to be the one who didn't make things worse. I whispered it, not even realizing I said it aloud. Why was I always the last to know? I heard gravel crunch behind me. Jace stepped up beside me, arms folded, watching the same empty stretch of lot. "You know," he said, "this isn't about you not being enough." I didn't turn to look. He kept going. "It's about them thinking you'd never fight back. That's how people like Rhett operate. They bank on silence. Yours, not theirs." That line didn't just land. It restructured something in me. It reframed everything. This wasn't about me being naive, or dumb, or soft. It was about them thinking I wouldn't push back, wouldn't question what I was handed, wouldn't notice when the room shifted around me. Jace reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "I didn't show you this earlier," he said. "Didn't know if it'd help, but maybe it will." He opened the photo and held it out. It was grainy. A screenshot. Security camera timestamp of the corner. 2 months ago. Rhett's truck, Marla's car. Parked next to each other. Behind the restaurant. No people in frame. But close. Too close. "Where'd you get this?" I asked. "I did some work for a guy who manages the security for that strip. He owed me." I stared at it. Finally, something that didn't just feel wrong. It looked wrong. A piece that could be traced, used, proved. If this is what they were doing before the wedding. I said, mostly to myself, I need to know what they planned for after. So I didn't drive straight there. I pulled off once, into a gas station, sat in the truck with the engine still running, and stared at the steering wheel for almost 15 minutes, not thinking, just holding the pressure, like if I moved too fast, everything inside would burst. But eventually, I made it to the north side. Sheridan's apartment complex was tucked behind an aging strip mall, the kind with more empty storefronts than open ones. I parked in the back, away from the main lot, where Rhett's truck wouldn't spot mine if he drove by. That's how careful I was being now. Because Sheridan? She wasn't just a name from Rhett's past. She was someone who had already paid the price for knowing him too well. I walked up the cracked concrete steps, 4th unit on the 2nd floor. The paint on her door was chipped around the handle. When I knocked, I heard the chain slide before the door even opened. Then, just one eye through the gap. She looked at me like I was a ghost from another life. "Brannon, it's me," I said, quiet. "Can we talk?" She hesitated. I didn't blame her. Then she unhooked the chain and opened the door wide enough for me to step in. No smile, no welcome, just understanding. "I can't talk long," she said, closing it behind us. "And Rhett can't know you were here." Her voice was tight, not scared, but practiced, like someone used to being on edge. I nodded. "I won't stay long. I just need to ask you a few things." She didn't offer a seat, so I didn't take one. We stood across from each other in the cramped living room, the blinds half closed, afternoon sun slicing through in uneven lines. "What's this about?" she asked. "Rhett," I said, "and Marla, and things that don't make sense anymore." Her face paled. "You saw something. I've been seeing more than I want to." She sat down finally, on the edge of a frayed love seat, her hands clasped tightly. "Rhett can't know," she repeated. If he finds out I talked to you. I waited. She took a breath and started. He doesn't control people the way folks think. It's not brute force. It's quieter, slower. He makes you feel like you owe him something. Like your thoughts aren't even yours anymore. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. He helped me once, she said. Paid my rent when I was behind, then used it every time I tried to pull away. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to say it all, at her own pace. He makes people need him, she said, then makes sure they never feel like they deserve to leave. She paused, looked down. And when he gets mad, he doesn't yell, not right away. He gets cold, strategic. And then, when he finally does blow up, it's like watching someone light a fuse they laid months ago. There was a long silence. I sat down finally, across from her. Did he ever talk about me? Sheridan nodded slowly. Not a lot, but when he did, it wasn't good. She hesitated again. 2 nights before your wedding, she said, he showed up here, drunk, loud, kept pacing around my kitchen, ranting. My heart kicked up. He said, Brannon doesn't deserve what he's getting. Over and over. He wouldn't explain. But then he said, some people are better off with someone who understands them. And I knew who he meant. I closed my eyes for half a second. Did he say Marla's name? She nodded. Yeah, he did. Did he touch you? No, she said quickly. But he did this. She pointed toward the wall behind the couch. There, half covered by a picture frame, was a jagged hole in the drywall, fist-sized, raw. He punched that, then left. I stared at it. It wasn't just anger. It was obsession. This wasn't about me. It wasn't even about her. It was about control. You haven't told anyone else? I asked. No, she whispered. Who would believe me? I leaned forward. I do. Her eyes flicked to mine, startled, then softened. I didn't mean to get involved, she said. But weeks before the wedding, I overheard him on the phone. He didn't know I was in the next room. What did he say? Her voice dropped. He told someone, Marla, I'm sure of it. Keep it together until after the wedding. She shook her head slowly. I didn't understand it then. But now, I stood up, pacing a few steps. My stomach churned. That one sentence felt like a slow blade, twisting. They hadn't just lied to me. They'd planned it. Or at least agreed to something I had no part in. Sheridan, I said carefully. Thank you for telling me. She nodded but didn't speak. She looked like she was trying not to cry. And maybe not for me. Maybe for herself. I moved toward the door. I won't mention your name, not to him, not to anyone. But just as I reached for the handle, tires screeched outside. We both froze. Then came the sound of a truck door slamming, heavy boots on the stairs. I didn't need to look. It's him, Sheridan whispered. My body tensed. I stepped out onto the landing just as Rhett reached the top step. He looked furious, and worse, confident. What the hell are you doing here? He growled. Talking, I said. To her? To someone who finally told the truth. Rhett stepped closer, shoulders squared. You're interfering with people you don't understand. No, I said, steady. I'm understanding a lot now. His face twisted. You're gonna regret this. I already regret not seeing it sooner. He shoved me, not hard, but enough to challenge. I caught his wrist mid-push, held it, firm. Touch me again, I said low, and we're done pretending we're brothers. He pulled back, startled. That was new, me setting the terms. He shook his head, forced a smirk. You don't know what you're getting into. I think I do. He looked past me toward Sheridan's door, then back. You're playing with fire, Brannon. Then maybe it's time someone let it burn. He turned without another word, stomped down the steps, slammed his door, and peeled out of the lot. I didn't move until the sound of his truck disappeared. Back inside, Sheridan stood frozen, arms crossed tightly. He's close to the edge, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Closer than I've ever seen him. I looked at her, serious. Has he ever said what he'd do if someone betrayed him? She swallowed. Yeah, once, he said, if someone close to me ever turned on me, I'd burn everything down. No hesitation. I nodded slowly. Then I said, mostly to myself, if Rhett's willing to hurt the people who protected him, I need to find out who he's planning to hurt next. By the time I pulled out of Sheridan's apartment complex, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the streets. The kind of fading light that made things feel unfinished, like the day had more to say, but was running out of time to say it. I drove west, then south again. Didn't need GPS to find my way. Aunt Heloise's house hadn't changed in 20 years. Still tucked behind the old pecan grove. Still smelled faintly of lemon balm and linoleum when you stepped inside. She was the kind of woman who didn't waste words or space. And tonight, I needed that kind of presence. When I parked out front, the porch light clicked on. Not motion sensor. She'd turned it on herself. I walked up slow, feeling every part of my chest tighten. Before I could knock, the door creaked open. Come in, she said simply. Her voice hadn't aged. Still calm, still quiet. Still had the weight of someone who'd seen too much and judged little. I stepped inside, and before I could say a word, she pointed to the same armchair I used to sit in as a boy. Sit down, she said. I've been expecting this. The words settled on my shoulders like a blanket pulled straight from memory. I sat, and for a moment, the silence felt thicker than any conversation. Then she spoke again. I suppose you're ready now, she said, to hear it. I don't know if I'm ready, I said honestly, but I'm tired of being the last to find out. She nodded once. No lecture, no preamble. I saw the way Rhett hovered around her. She began, her eyes steady. Long before you proposed, it wasn't obvious, not unless you were watching. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. Marla stopped smiling the same way when you entered a room, and Rhett, he always seemed to find a reason to be nearby when she was talking to anyone but you. Always listening. Always. Measuring. I didn't interrupt. My hands gripped the sides of the chair. I thought, maybe it was nothing. I prayed it was. But then the conversations changed. If you walked into a room, they stopped talking. Not because you interrupted, but because they didn't want you to hear. I swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at me, full of something that wasn't guilt, but wasn't pride either. Because no one else believed me, she said, and I was afraid they'd say I was just bitter. Jealous of Marla, afraid of Rhett. I didn't want to start a fire I couldn't put out. The words landed heavy. And, she added softer now, you were happy. I hadn't seen you that way in a long time. I didn't want to be the one who crushed that. I felt it again, that pressure in my chest, like my own ribs were starting to fold inward. Did others see it too? I asked. She hesitated, then stood and walked over to a drawer, pulled something out, returned to her seat. They saw it, she said quietly. They just chose not to care. She handed me her phone. On the screen was a screenshot of a group chat. The names at the top. I recognized them all. My cousins, my sister, even a couple of my brothers. I didn't want to read it, but I did. Brannon always did live in his own little bubble. If Marla ever wakes up and leaves him, we'll all know why. Guy couldn't read a room if it slapped him. Then I saw it. Rhett, relax. I'll make sure she's happy if he can't. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I nearly choked on it. My hand shook so hard I had to set the phone down on the table. I didn't want you to see that, Heloise said gently, but you needed to. I stood up, couldn't sit anymore. I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped out into the dying light. The air was warm but felt sharp, like even the wind had something to say tonight. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but something in me cracked wide open. I remembered being 8 years old, giving up the last piece of cake because someone else asked first. I remembered sharing a bedroom with 2 brothers while Rhett had his own. I remembered volunteering to drive cousins home, being the one who fixed things quietly, the one who never made waves. And now it all made sense. They counted on me staying small, on me not asking questions, on me not fighting back. And maybe, until now, they were right. I heard the screen door creak behind me. Heloise joined me on the porch, carrying a small envelope in her hand. "This," she said, holding it out, "was left for you." I took it, opened it. Inside was a folded contract. The paper was slightly yellowed with time. I unfolded it slowly, and there it was. Brannon Keene, listed as co-owner of the family lake property. I blinked, but Rhett always said it was his, I muttered. Heloise nodded. "Your uncle wanted it divided. He gave it to me years ago. Said you'd need it one day, when you were strong enough to stop being quiet." I looked down at my name, printed clear as day. This wasn't just legal. It was symbolic, something they couldn't gaslight away. "Why didn't anyone say anything?" I asked. She gave a faint, sad smile. "Because silence keeps the wrong people comfortable." I folded the paper, tucked it into my jacket. Inside my chest, something had shifted. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't scared. I was angry, but not the kind that eats you alive. This was the kind of anger that builds houses, tears down walls, starts revolutions. I turned to Heloise. "I'm not letting them write my story for me anymore." Her smile deepened just a little. "Then it's time you took the pen." I nodded. No more shrinking, no more second guessing. They wanted the youngest son to stay harmless, agreeable, invisible. But they'd pushed too far. As I walked toward my truck, the sky turned that deep indigo blue, the kind that shows up just before night really settles in. I opened the door, slid into the seat, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. "If my family wanted a quiet youngest son," I said, voice steady, "they're about to meet the man they created instead." The drive to Rhett's house was quiet, but not calm. The kind of quiet you get before a thunderstorm breaks loose. Not a single part of me was shaking, though, not like before. This time, I wasn't walking into that house to ask for answers. I was walking in to deliver truth. In the seat next to me sat a thick folder. Inside it, the napkin from the diner, the printed screenshot from the security camera, Sheridan's written statement, and most importantly, the co-ownership contract for the lake property. Every piece of it real, verifiable, weighty. The street was dim, only a few porch lights on. When I pulled up to Rhett's place, I noticed the flickering bulb above his door. Seemed fitting, still trying to look warm but ready to burn out. I knocked once. The door opened almost instantly. Rhett stood there, shirt half tucked, drink in hand, like he'd just gotten out of the shower and into trouble. "Well, well," he said, leaning on the frame. "Didn't think you'd actually show." "I wasn't planning to," I said, "but plans change." He stepped aside, motioning me in like I was a guest. "Make yourself at home," he said, like none of this was real. I walked in. The air smelled like bourbon and arrogance. Without sitting, I placed the folder on the table between us. He didn't look at it. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, poured himself another drink, then turned to me with a lazy grin. "You done playing detective?" he asked, voice light, mocking. I didn't answer. I just opened the folder and spread the papers out, neat, visible, undeniable. His eyes finally moved, landed on the diner photo, then the contract. He raised an eyebrow, took a sip, and shrugged. "So?" The indifference in his tone hit harder than if he'd yelled, like I was still just a bug on the windshield of his world. "You lied," I said. "To who?" "To everyone." He smirked again, leaned back against the counter. "You always thought the truth mattered more than the outcome. That's why you lose." His words didn't sting like they used to. They just confirmed what I already knew. Then he walked over, reached into a drawer, and pulled out a photo. Handed it to me slowly, deliberately. It was Marla and Rhett, standing outside that same restaurant. Her hand wasn't in his, but it was close. Their faces too comfortable, too familiar. "She wasn't supposed to tell anyone," Rhett said flatly. "You were never supposed to know. That was the deal." I stared at the photo for a long beat, then set it down carefully. "You think she chose you?" he continued, eyes glinting. "She settled for safety. I gave her spark." Every syllable was designed to cut, and it almost did. Almost. Until I reached into the folder and slid the co-ownership contract across the table toward him. He picked it up without much care at first. Then his eyes landed on the signatures. His smirk faded. Just a flicker. But I saw it. "You signed it," I said. "You knew that land was ours, but you told the family it was yours alone. That's fraud, Rhett." He put the paper down more gently than expected. "You have no idea how this game works," he muttered. "I'm starting to," I replied, "and I'm playing it better than you think." I went down the list. Sheridan's statement, Jace's testimony, the footage, the napkin. "You've built a web of half-truths and charm," I said, "but I've got real proof, and people are finally willing to talk." Rhett didn't respond. He stared at the floor, then walked toward the hallway. When he came back, he held his phone. He tapped something, then turned the screen toward me. Marla's voice came through the speaker, muffled but clear. "I don't know if I made a mistake marrying him. I feel trapped." The audio stopped. He didn't say anything, just let the silence do its work. "You recorded her?" I asked quietly. He smiled. "She knew. They always do, deep down." There was no pride in his face, just control, cruel, calm control. "She said that in a moment of pain," I said. "You're using it as a weapon." He leaned closer. "I collect leverage, Brannon. You collect feelings." Something inside me snapped, but not in the way he hoped. I stood slowly. He was trying to bait me into rage, into swinging, into doing something he could twist. Instead, I took a breath and said, "You just showed me who you really are, and you think that's going to help you." That hit him harder than any punch. He stepped back, rattled, pacing now, his drink forgotten on the table. "She comes alive around me," he hissed, "in ways she never did with you. You know that, don't you? You saw it." I didn't answer. My silence said more than any insult could. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, zipped it up. You're not going to fight? He mocked. No, I said. I'm going to expose. You think they'll believe you? They don't have to, I replied. They'll see you for themselves. I turned to go. That's when I heard the sound, the sharp whistle of something cutting the air. A glass crashed into the wall behind me, shattering into 100 bright pieces. You think you can walk out on me? He shouted. I turned, calm, cold. I already did, I said, a long time ago. Then I stepped over the broken glass and walked out the door. The night air was thick, warm. I didn't rush. Inside me, something had shifted. I thought walking out of his house would end the night. I whispered to myself. I didn't know he'd already planned his next move. I didn't sleep much that night. Even after walking out of Rhett's house, even after stepping over the shattered glass like it meant nothing, the silence in my apartment didn't bring peace. It just echoed back everything he'd said, everything he hadn't. When morning finally came, I was still dressed in yesterday's clothes, slumped on the couch with the evidence folder on the coffee table, unopened. Sunlight crept in through the blinds. I rubbed my eyes and checked my phone. 3 voicemails. The first was shaky, desperate. Brannon, it's me. Just call me, all right? We need to talk. There's more you don't understand. I didn't mean for things to go this way. The second, hours later, had lost the urgency. Now it was defensive, agitated. You're twisting everything. You don't even know what she told me. You're letting people get in your head, man. That's not who you are. The third, cold, icy enough to settle in my bones. You keep pushing this, and you're going to regret it. This is family, and you don't turn on your own unless you're ready to be on your own. 3 voices, same man, 3 different masks falling off in real time. I deleted them. Not because I wasn't listening, but because I'd heard enough. Around 10, Marla messaged. Can we talk? Somewhere neutral. I don't want any more drama. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. The park near Maine and Willow. 1 p.m. In public. She agreed. I spent the next few hours just existing, making coffee I didn't drink, checking mail I didn't care about. When it was time, I drove to the park early, sat on a bench near the trail where parents pushed strollers and old men played dominoes under the trees. I wanted witnesses. I didn't trust the quiet anymore. Marla arrived 5 minutes late. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back in a messy way that wasn't her usual. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Eyes red-rimmed, lips drawn tight. She sat on the opposite end of the bench without a word. Finally, she said, "He got in my head." I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. "He told me you'd leave," she continued, "that you were too good at disappearing when things got hard, that I'd end up alone again." Her voice broke on that last word. "He made me feel seen, like he knew all the parts I tried to hide from you." "But he wasn't you," she added quickly, like she needed to say it before I interrupted. I kept looking straight ahead. A kid chased a squirrel near the sidewalk. The world kept moving, like none of this mattered. "He asked me to postpone the wedding," she said. "Said we were rushing. I told him no, and after that, he changed, got more intense." "You slept with him?" She flinched. "No, not before the wedding." I turned toward her. "After?" She didn't answer, and that was all the answer I needed. "I felt safer with you," she whispered. "But I felt more alive around him, and I hated myself for that." I closed my eyes, let that land. It didn't explode. It just sank, slow and deep. I'm filing for annulment, I said. Or divorce. Whichever the lawyer says makes more sense. Her eyes welled up. I'm not doing this out of anger, Marla. I'm doing it because I won't keep living in a story where I'm the only one trying to tell the truth. She reached for my hand. I didn't move. After a moment, she pulled back. We sat in silence for a few minutes before she stood. I'm sorry, she said. That's all I can offer. Then she walked away. Later that afternoon, I met with an attorney, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. I laid everything out on her desk, the footage, the screenshots, the testimony, the contract. She flipped through them one by one, nodding slowly. Your brother may be facing civil consequences, especially around the property misrepresentation, depending on how far you want to take it. I just want the truth on record, I said. I want people to stop pretending. That, she replied, we can do. It was nearly sunset when I got back to my apartment. I had just kicked off my shoes when I heard shouting outside. I stepped to the window. Rhett. Pacing on the sidewalk, arms waving, voice raised loud enough for the whole complex to hear. Brannon, come out here and be a man. You want to fix this? Or you just want to hide behind papers and pity? Someone on the third floor shouted for him to shut up. Another neighbor pointed a phone camera in his direction. I stayed inside. I didn't owe him another scene. Instead, I dialed the non-emergency line. The officers arrived 10 minutes later. Rhett tried to talk his way through it, charming, pleading, then finally yelling as they pulled him back toward his truck. You think you won? He screamed. You think any of this makes you better? But I wasn't even angry. I was just tired, and strangely, finally, at peace. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. In front of me was the diner napkin, the one that started it all. A scribbled note, a time, a place, meaningless then. Everything now. I smoothed the edges carefully. No tears, no sentimentality, just a quiet recognition that this had been the thread that unraveled the whole thing. I placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote one word on the front. Evidence. Rhett would face legal heat for the contract. The family, for once, had nothing to say. Some of them apologized in awkward, hushed tones. Others just avoided eye contact. Marla left town. No note, no forwarding address, just gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel hollow either. I felt whole. Because for once, I wasn't quiet to keep the peace. I was quiet because I'd finally found peace. I didn't win because I exposed them, I told myself, staring at the sealed envelope. I won because I finally stopped letting them decide who I was.